So, our third big topic this week is kind of some hands on experiments we've been doing with the full O1 reasoning model that was announced on the first day of OpenAI's 12 Days of OpenAI
That feels
event.
like 3 months ago.
I honestly wrote this sentence this morning. I was like, that can't be right. Wasn't what that was
So
last
crazy.
week? Like,
Yeah.
yeah. So, as a quick refresher, this O1 model, it's notable because it takes time to think through problems. It uses step-by-step chain of thought reasoning. This makes it kind of operate in a fundamentally different way than previous models. And it also means it's very, very good at certain types of complex problem-solving tasks, as well as math, coding, and science. Some people even claim that it approaches the level of a PhD at certain tasks. So it's also multimodal, at least in the sense that it can process images and text together. So what we did, Paul, you and I met. We did a bunch of different experiments with the tool and kind of learned, I think, quite a bit in a fairly short amount of time. So I kind of wanted to get your initial thoughts on O1. What did you use it for? Where did you find it helpful? Where maybe did it fall short? And then I can also share some tests that I ran on the model this past week as well.
Yeah, so when we sat down to do the hackathon, which I think I alluded to on last week's podcast, that we were gonna run that and we would share, our experiences. So I think it was about like an hour and a half, 2 hours, kinda, met and kinda worked through a couple things. And what we were trying to get at was, what are its capabilities? What are the use cases for businesses? Not like, we're not trying to solve complex math problems. We're not trying to,
Right.
like, invent, pharmaceuticals. Like, we're trying to figure out business strategies and, personas and things like that. And so we wanted to look at use cases and then try and figure out, do we want to pay the $200 a month, or are we good at this 20, $30 a month we're paying? Is that sufficient? And how would we use this on an ongoing basis versus like buy it and forget we even have it and
Mhm.
never use it? So the one I'm trying to, like, whenever I'm testing things, I'm trying to use real life situations that I can assess whether or not this would actually make a difference in my life. I don't pick like random, really hard problems to like do an eval against. I don't find them terribly helpful to people. So we try and focus in on, like, this is something I do as a CEO or whatever. And if it can help me here, then it can help other CEOs. It's kind of how I think about this. So one in particular I was looking at, I mentioned earlier, I'm spending a lot of time on our AI mastery program and our online academy. And so I'm thinking deeply about like pricing models. And so I actually went in and I gave the same prompt to O1 as I did to GPT 4.0, because I wanted to compare the model we're used to using, which is pretty good, to this reasoning model and see what does it do differently in a problem that seems like it would be more complex to solve, more chain of thought required. So I went in and gave it like our AI Mastery membership program pricing model. I gave it a couple of things I'm thinking about doing. And then I said, like, basically analyze this for me. This is my goal.
Mm.
How would I best achieve this, the outcome I'm looking for? And I told it, ask any clarifying questions that you need. So with that simple prompt in mind, it was only with 3 sentences. One, I'll say O1, again, I gave the same prompt to both models. O1 asked way more complex and nuanced questions than 4.0. So immediately you could see that it was more deeply understanding and considering what I was asking of it based on the questions it came back to me with. Same way you would assess a strategist. Like, if I sit down and meet with somebody, the questions they ask often tells me their level of intellect and their ability to do strategy well.
Mm.
O1 gave a much richer explanation up front about like a synopsis of its answer. The scenarios it presented were way more thought out. There was way more reasoning that went into them. And then it provided much more context and insights overall. It was an overall longer output, but there wasn't a waste of characters or words. It was like all good stuff that would have, if I was actually had time, I would have continued on working with it and really analyzed some of these key areas. That being said, 4.0 was formatted nicer, like, I don't, for whatever that's worth. And 4.0 didn't do a bad job.
Right.
But side by side, O1 crushed this one over 4.0. So I'll come back to like, would we pay for the license and things like that, Mike, after you kind of walk through your tests.
Yeah, no, that's a great way to set up experiments with this. And I'd set mine up very similarly in the sense of just going head to head 4.0 with O1. I won't get into every single detail here, but I ran through 4, again, real world scenarios of problems I'm trying to solve in one context or another, including we've had a lot of questions like, hey, based on our podcast performance, should we be adding another episode, doing more limited edition series? So I gave it a bunch of performance data told it the problem and tried to solve that and got recommendations. I'm like, hey, build a strategic plan for me that answers questions we might have, recommends what we should do. Did similar things for like building a content strategy. I gave it a bunch of historical performance of our blog and just said, hey, build me like 2 sentences, build me a full comprehensive plan to maximize traffic through new content and updates to existing content. We gave it some information on course conversions, people using codes to buy our piloting AI course, and then asked a bunch of, got a breakdown of a bunch of questions we should be asking, recommendations. And then last but not least, I just want to dwell on this one really quickly. We obviously run a ton of different workshops through Marketing AI Institute and SmarterX. One of these is like an applied AI workshop that I've run with a bunch of different teams. I run it at Macon every year. And what you come out of it with is tons and tons of different use cases for AI in your organization. What we do with that is our team of experts sits down, analyzes all that info and writes, like a brief that's pretty extensive and comprehensive after a workshop. It takes a very long amount of time to fully do. But it's really valuable. And I basically just gave O1 like dummy data from like that kind of just like anonymized and like from one of our workshops that we had ran internally, and then said like, here's how the workshop works. Here's what's in the final brief. Go make one. And I was blown away. It did an incredible job. It would be like a very good first start. Like if we got it from a human strategist, I would be like, yeah, this person did a fantastic
Like if you got
job.
it from an entry-level employee, you'd be like, this
Easily,
person's moving up
easily.
fast.
Yeah, easily. So, I mean, overall, kind of similar takeaways to you. O1 is legit. Like, again, these aren't PhD level problems. I'm not even equipped to evaluate a PhD level problem. So I'm sure there's more robust ways to test this, but stacked up against 4.0, hands down, more robust, comprehensive, and helpful. Um, I hate the fact you can't upload files or spreadsheets yet. I hope that changes. The way I got data in there was just hacking it by copying and pasting a bunch of unstructured data, which actually did a great job with somehow. But I would love if we got that. And then, of course, I see a lot of people talking about this online, so I feel like I'm not the only one here that's struggling, but I still don't get the sense I've pushed it fully to its limits because I don't know how to structure a PhD level science problem and then evaluate it. But I'm definitely impressed so far, much more so than I think I was during the preview phase when I was like still struggling to figure out what do I even use this for?
Yeah, I agree. And I think that, that's our, overall takeaway is the $200 a month. I think you and I landed on this, Mike. It's not worth it unless you plan on like using Sora a ton, like because the
Right.
Sora use is like built into the 200, but there's nothing in the $200 license that's going to get you something on the O1 model that you're probably not going to be good with the existing license. Is that right?
I think so. I'm interested that right now there are differences in the context windows, but again, it's like
Okay.
if we had like 2 or 3 of these workshop type use cases where it's like, hey, we're doing this every month and this saves us however many hours per month on those things, then sure, I could see a use case for it. But yeah, I think your average business, unless you really put in some work to identify some crazy valuable use cases, you probably don't need beyond O1 of what you get in a plus or a team license.
Okay. Yeah. And I think, one thing that this just highlights for me, Mike and I were talking about, like if we gave this to an entry level person, like I always think back to like my agency life, like when I was running an
Yeah.
agency and at its peak, I think we had like 20 people roughly. And we hired a lot of, younger professionals, and you would spend years developing strategic capabilities in them, years. Like it's not something most people, maybe like MBA programs and stuff might come out of it that way, but we were hiring out of communication schools, business schools, marketing backgrounds. A lot of times they're not trained to be analysts and, strategists in college, really. Like you get some
Right.
peripheral stuff, but like you need experience to get that. And so when I think about that, or, even now, like with our companies, the question that a lot of industries are going to have to deal with is this better in its O1 form? Like knowing it's going to get smarter. Is it better than the average human who would otherwise do this?
Mm.
And I think, and this is what I said when we talked about AGI on earlier episodes, like, I don't even care if we get to AGI. If we ever agree on what it is, and we'll talk a little bit more about AGI in a couple minutes, but like my whole premise is it doesn't matter. Like if the AI models keep getting better, thinking, reasoning, understanding, imagination, which is a whole separate thing and we'll talk about at some point, creating this stuff, if it does those things better than the average human who would otherwise do the job in your business, in your industry, then we got some problems in terms of the future of work and
Yeah.
workforce and
Yeah.
the economy. And here's the reality. They're already better than the average human at a lot of things. Like it's, and if you think about your teams, if you think about your organizations, there are very few organizations that are all A players. Like there are some exceptional ones that are dominated by A players, but there's a lot of B and C players in most companies. And my concern is these models are already at B, C player level
Yep.
in most use cases in knowledge work. And once you can like string those together, and once you have like a full blown plan of how to integrate these models and use them to their fullest capability, who cares about solving biology and math and, you know, scientific problems if they solve business problems? And they're really good at that right now with human oversight. So
Yeah.
this is my, I don't know, concern going into 2025. I just think it's going to become a reality for a lot more people next year. They're going to realize how capable these things already are of doing a lot of knowledge work at or above average human level.
Yeah. I haven't seen a single thing so far to disprove that statement, that it's already doing B and C level player
Easily.
work.
Mostly it's doing A. I mean, that's the problem.
I would
It's
agree.
actually doing A work.
I know. Yeah.
If you knew there was no errors, like if you knew it was above human error rate,
Yep.
it's likely already at A player level in a lot of what it does.
Yeah. It's going to be a wild 2025.
Yeah.
Spoiler, there's a bunch of questions around that for the 25 questions episode. That
Yeah, I do
we're
have to
gonna
laugh.
tackle.
Like, one other note here, we'll drop it in because I don't think we have this in the show notes, Mike. We'll drop this in as just like a little kicker for people if you want to check the show notes. So the Klarna CEO related to this, we've talked about this Klarna, like the customer support agent company, whatever. And so he's like doing these interviews where he's saying, we're not hiring any more humans. There's this natural attrition and like 20% a year our people leave and we just won't backfill. We went from 4,000 employees to 3,500 employees. And you listen to these interviews and everybody's tweeting this thing, like this soundbite. And it's like, oh my God, it's happening. Yet you go to their company website and they have 56 job openings. Which I assume they're not hiring agents, but like they're trying to hire 56 humans. So it's just like, yeah, I guess it's one of those moments of like, let's all just like pump the brakes and realize there's going to be a lot of hype still. Jobs are going to be impacted, but it probably isn't going to be as bad as it sounds in a lot of cases. And there's probably more to the story when you hear about this stuff. So don't overreact. Let's like step back and analyze the situation. And we're going to do our best to be as objective as possible next year, because I think this is going to become a very real thing in some industries. And we want to make sure we don't get caught up in the hype of it all.